guys, thanks for joining me again. We are actually discussing week 2 of our series, Us for Them. So last week, we talked about this idea or this misconception that it's us or them. This mentality that we tend to deal with when we come in contact with people, especially people we don't understand or people that we have conflict with, is that it's us or them. And we even transfer that into God. A lot of times it's us or him. And what we looked at last week was that God doesn't have the mentality of him or us, even though it should be, because, let's face it, because of our sin, we were born enemies of God. But instead, God is for us. That was the topic of last week. God is for us. And we saw that he had a plan in place to restore the relationship with us that we had broken, right? We had broken the relationship with God and each other, but he had a plan to restore that. God made a promise to Abraham that Abraham was going to be a part of that plan. God promised Abraham a couple things. He promised to make Abraham's descendants a great nation, which we know that eventually happened as Israel became a nation. And then God told Abraham that he'd be blessed, and he would do this through blessing Israel so Israel could then bless the entire world. And this whole idea was revolutionary because nations of the world during this time, and really, honestly, even now, don't have this idea or this desire to bless each other. During Israel's day, the nations were looking for ways to conquer, destroy, or even enslave each other, not bless each other. And so, as we left off last week, we saw that Abraham, we left him at the moment that God had called him to leave everything, his land, his people, his identity behind, and follow God on this new adventure. And as we left him, Abraham agreed to go. And so if this was like a Disney movie, this would be the moments where the credits would roll. It was a happy ending, but that's not quite how it turned out, right? What we saw was this. Israel got off to a slow start, but eventually it became a large nation. They went on to be enslaved actually by Egypt, but then God rescued them. And then they wandered the desert for 40 years, waiting on God to lead them to this land that he promised to give Abraham. And finally, the nation got some land and a king. In fact, they had a few kings, and things seemed to be going well. But hundreds of years after the original promise of Abraham, Israel just kept screwing things up. And so over and over again, Israel turned its back on God. They were choosing to create their own rules instead of submitting to God and his rule. And they also forgot the key part of the promise that said they would be a blessing to everyone on the earth. God said, I will bless you so that you can bless everyone on the earth. Instead, they began to hurt and oppress other people. So God sent them prophets, and these prophets were people who would challenge God's people to get serious about following God and fulfilling the promise that God gave them to be for other people. But even the prophets struggled to teach Israel God's truths. They would teach them, but Israel refused to listen. And so God, here's the thing, I want us to see this. God never stopped being for Israel. However, being for somebody sometimes means that you are for their growth. And sometimes you have to let people grow by experiencing the consequences of their actions. And so God allowed the nation of Israel to be taken captive and enslaved once again, and this time by the nations of Babylon and Assyria. So during this time, God sent a prophet named Jeremiah to give them a message. It was a message that they needed to hear, but it was going to be hard for them to hear. It was going to be difficult. In Jeremiah chapter 1, I'm going to throw it up on the screen. Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 1 through 9, here's what it says. The words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, one of the priests of Anathoth, in the territory of Benjamin. The word of the Lord came to him in the 13th year of the reign of Josiah, son of Ammon, king of Judah. And through the reign of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, down to the 5th month of the 11th year of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah, when the people of Jerusalem went into exile. The word of the Lord came unto me, this is Jeremiah, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Alas, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I am too young. But the Lord said to me, Do not say I am too young. You must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you. So God was telling Jeremiah, I'm giving you a message that you've got to give to Israel. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and I will rescue you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, I have put my words in your mouth. Moving on to Jeremiah chapter. So he comes to Jeremiah. He says, I've got a message that I want you to give my people. And here is the message. It's found in Jeremiah chapter 29, starting in verse 4. Here's what it says. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Now, I want you to imagine for just a minute, right, as I read this. Imagine that our country was taken over by a foreign nation. Now, our beloved land is now their land, and we find ourselves in enemy territory. Now, can you imagine how you would feel? Not only that, but they probably captured and killed a lot of your friends and people. Can you imagine how much you would hate them? How you would pray for their destruction? That is how Israel felt during this time. But as Jeremiah gives them this message from God, this message about them and their enemies, the people that they say, it's us or them, right? They were definitely not for these people. Jeremiah tells them to do something completely counterintuitive and honestly offensive. It would have been offensive to the Israelite people. Here's what he says. I want you to make homes here. Build houses and settle down in enemy territory. Turn your enemies into friends. Take care of their land. Plant gardens. Seek peace with these people, right? Pray to the Lord for it. Like, imagine God asking you to do that. And here's the thing, it wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time, and it would take intention, and it would take love on your part. See, instead of hoping for their enemies to be destroyed by God, he told them to hope and pray for their enemies to be blessed. Israel was saying it's us or them, but Jeremiah was saying, no, guys, God is telling you this. It's not us or them, because we are called to be for them. We are called to be for other people. God was reminding Israel what he promised Abraham so long ago, that God's people were going to do things differently. God's people would be for others, just like God had been for them. So Israel, here's the thing, even though they got this message from a prophet, from God, Israel didn't believe it. Israel and other false prophets during this time were convinced that God was going to rescue them at any moment, that he was going to swoop down and destroy their enemies. So they thought it was pointless to get comfortable and to make peace with these people. They didn't care about Babylon. They only cared about themselves. See, God called Israel, God formed Israel to be a blessing to other people, but they were focusing on themselves. We are also called to be for other people, and we'll talk about this, but we're called to be for people, but we so often get so focused on ourselves, we only care about ourselves. See, in Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 10 through 11, throw that up there real quick. This is our big idea of the day. We are called for others. Here's what Jeremiah 29, verses 10 and 11 says. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. See, God's plans, often like ours, how we experience God, his plans didn't look like Israel's plans. And a lot of times God's plan doesn't seem to look like our plans. He was telling Israel, you're going to have 70 more years of captivity. But here's what he tells them. Even though the message doesn't sound like something you want, these plans I have for you are not to harm you, but to give you a hope and a future. See this, a lot of times we hear this verse. You may be very familiar with this verse. You may have heard it at a graduation, or you may have heard it taught to you, and you may have gotten this idea that God is telling us that someday all our dreams are going to come true because I have plans that are going to help you. And here's the thing. It's not a promise that God will someday make all of our dreams come true. What it is a reminder that about who God is, and that God's people are called to be for others. See, the hope and the future wasn't necessarily just for them, it was for the entire world through them. See, many years after Jeremiah, God showed us exactly what it looked like to be for people who are supposed to be our enemies. In John chapter 3, verse 16 and 17, another very familiar verse, it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him." Jesus entered into enemy territory to show us that God was for us. God calls us to do the same. The things that he asks us to do is not something that he was not willing to do himself. He calls us to make friends with our enemies, to make a home in a world that is not our home, to seek the well-being and the peace of those around us. Because God calls us to be for others, right? God calls, I'm going to throw that back up there real quick. God calls us to be for others. So, what does that look like? How can we follow the example of Jesus to be for others? There's a few ways that we can do that. Resolve a conflict. Maybe you can identify a battle line that has been drawn between you and someone and then cross it. Not with hostility, but with forgiveness, humility, and peace. Right now, we are living in a time of tension in our world. There's racial tension. There is definitely political tension. And it's so easy to draw lines and say it's us or them. But one way to help follow through with what God has called us to do is resolve conflicts, to cross that line and say, no, it's us for them. I don't care if there's a conflict. I want to resolve it with peace and humility. We can make a friend. Some of you may say, well, I'm not very good at making friends. That's okay. But we are called to be friendly, to make friends. Cross that imaginary boundary line and sit and talk to and say hello to somebody new. Maybe somebody at the lunch table. If you guys, I know some schools don't do lunch tables right now, but if you see somebody that is not, they're not the popular kid, or they're not somebody that's just like you, or they're sitting by themselves, go make a friend with them. Learn from someone new is another way. Notice someone who thinks, lives, maybe was raised differently than you, and pursue a friendship. In our culture, it's so easy to just group into people that are like us. But my challenge to you is find somebody who you know is different than you, who is raised differently, who thinks differently, who acts differently, and pursue a friendship with them. Not so that you can change them to be more like you, but so that you can grow together through your similarities, but also through your differences. And here's the last one. Share what you have. Like God blessed Israel so that they could then give to the world around them, to bless the world around them, how can we give to others from the things that we've been given? Share what we have. It could be knowledge. It could be things. It could be love. It could be time. Share what we have to bless others the way God has blessed us. See, this way of living was and is radical, but it's what the world needs right now. The world is in chaos. The world is broken. The world needs God's people who've been blessed by God so that they can bless the people around us. So how can you be for people? We're called to be for others. How can you be for people the way God is for you? That's my challenge to you guys today. I hope you'll watch this video. I try to keep it shorter than normal. But just remember, God is for us. If you're dealing with some issues today, maybe you're dealing with issues against God, just know this. God is not against you. God is for you. God set out from the beginning to create and have a plan to restore relationship with you, but then also so that you can help restore relationships with other people and help them restore their relationship with God. So know that God is for you, and we, because of that, are to be for others. Talk to you guys later. Just one quick reminder. We have our activity this Sunday. I hope you guys will join us. We're meeting at the Omniplex. I think it's the Omnifun. I don't even know what it's called. Omnifunplex in Cincinnati Mills, by Cincinnati Mills. It's in Forest Park. I'm going to send out a flyer again on GroupMe just to remind you guys. I'll send emails to your parents to remind them. I'm going to send out a thing that you can RSVP so that we kind of know how many people are coming. Here's the thing. We would love to see you. We would love to see your friends. If you have friends that want to come, we would love to have them join us. Just try to RSVP so we know how many to expect. And there's going to be from 4 to 7, unlimited laser tag, trampoline jumping, bowling. We're going to have pizza. Parents can drop you off at 4 and pick you up at 7. Make sure you sign the waiver online so you don't have to do it when you get there. Other than that, if you guys need anything, text us, email, call, whatever you guys need, and we'll see you guys on Sunday. Bye.